In the years following the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA has been the suspected culprit in almost every major conspiracy theory that the uninitiated public is aware of. It has served as the scapegoat for every tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist, as well as the more reasonable ones, regardless of what the theory might be. This treatment can also be found throughout Hollywood, especially since they were the ones that created the archetype of the conspiracy theorist character to begin with, the same one that would become a standard trope across film and television later on down the line. You've probably seen it yourself. The conspiracy theorist is almost always the guy that everyone else calls crazy. The walls in his room are decked out with maps and flowcharts that overlook his otherwise cluttered living space, a space that could have been cleaned had it not been for him spending copious amount of time on his computer, and sometimes is depicted as being unhealthy or hygienically challenged. That is, of course, until we segue into Act 3 of the film, where the characters that made fun of the conspiracy theorists see the alien or the monster with their own eyes for the first time, and realize that the conspiracy theorist character was right all along. But it's too late because, well, you finish it off. The point is that almost every Hollywood production that features a conspiracy theorist character is pretty predictable. The immediate image that comes to someone's mind when thinking of a conspiracy theorist is typically the character archetype I just mentioned. Despite having never seen a legitimate conspiracy theorist wearing a tinfoil hat, people still use the tinfoil hat comment as a derogatory jab toward people like you and I. The reason for that is because they were programmed by Hollywood and others to view us that way. And the longer this false archetype is drilled into people's heads through repetition, so-called authoritative sources, and the strobing flickering lights beaming off of our computer screens, the more removed society gets from the idea that there actually are intelligent, friendly, and reasonable people out there that simply entertain the potential truth of alternative theories. One of the primary traits of the worn-out crazy conspiracy theorist trope seen throughout Hollywood is that the crazy guy almost always tends to blame the world's ills on a single entity, the CIA. But why is this the case? Why is it that the CIA is the go-to entity to be blamed by conspiracy theorists both in real life and in Hollywood? Why is it that every other intelligence or government agency escapes the infamous reputation the CIA has somehow obtained? In part, it's because of moments like these.
A potential bombshell of an apology today from the head of the CIA to the Senate Intelligence Committee for peeping into their computers and spying on Senate investigators who were looking into CIA practices. Jake, the CIA issued a statement just a short time ago. What are they admitting to?
Well, they're admitting to having told some false statements before. Specifically, there's this question about this investigation by the Senate into practices, interrogation practices that the larger community, and according to the Geneva Conventions, are torture.
The CIA has released documents that show its role in the 1953 coup. That is the coup that toppled Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh.
The American Central Intelligence Agency has been accused of manipulating citizens of countries all over the world. The number of Canadians are considering suing the CIA. They believe they are victims of covert CIA experiments. Two Canadians who feel the past 20 years of their lives were damaged by the CIA. They believe they were part of a CIA project called MK Ultra. The CIA was seeking a new weapon, aimed not at the body, but at the mind.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories were circulated here and believed here. This would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Although many people are quick to dismiss conspiracy theories and those who entertain them, very few of those people are able to tell you where the term may have come from to begin with, or what it really means. To most people, the term simply means crazy, nonsensical ideas believed by equally crazy and nonsensical people, and has always existed. However, the origin of the conspiracy theory is possibly a sort of conspiracy in and of itself. This idea was first put forth by political scientist Lance DeHaven-Smith in his 2013 book, Conspiracy Theory in America, and in it he suggests that the term first entered everyday language in the United States after 1964, 1 year after JFK was killed, and the same year the Warren Commission published its findings on his assassination. Soon after the commission published its findings, the New York Times ran 5 stories that featured the term conspiracy theory. DeHaven-Smith's suggestion has been countered, though. Michael Butter, a professor of American literary and cultural history at the University of Tübingen, takes up issue with the following document in which de Havensmith references to support his argument. This document is concerning the Warren Report and was publicly released in 1976. In it, there is no usage of the term conspiracy theory in the singular, but rather only mentions the plural conspiracy theories once in the sentence, quote, "Conspiracy theories have frequently thrown suspicion on our organization, for example, by falsely alleging that Lee Harvey Oswald worked for us." Regardless of whether or not the CIA really did create the term with the intention of discrediting alternative theories on important events, the simple fact is that it worked perfectly anyway. As time went on, and with the help of TV, radio, Hollywood, and the mainstream media creating the mentally unstable conspiracy theorist whack job archetype we see so often in our entertainment, the term now evokes only the potent mental image of exactly that for anyone who hears it. The image of a tinfoil hat-wearing nutjob that believes in outlandish and impossible things. Meanwhile, because of these artificial associations between tinfoil hatters and the term pushed on us by the media, we lose sight of what the term really means, which is the simple idea that a crime was perpetrated by a group of individuals who conspired with one another in order to achieve a particular objective. That is a conspiracy, and it's a legitimate crime that can be prosecuted in a court of law. Despite all of that, it really doesn't matter, unfortunately. People perceive conspiracy theorists in a negative light because they are victims of decades worth of programming. Regardless of where the term actually originated from, one thing remains true. The activities undertaken by the CIA are often criminal, and in fact, entirely fit the formal definition of what a criminal conspiracy truly is. Earlier, I asked why it was that the CIA has managed to earn this infamous reputation as depicted in mainstream entertainment, and why they are so commonly blamed by conspiracy theorists and others for much of the world's ills. There's really no good way to say this, but it's because they are responsible for a lot of it. Some of the world's most horrific moments that have caused unfathomable amounts of pain and suffering around the world have been perpetrated by this single organization. And even worse, they orchestrate it from the shadows, enjoying complete secrecy with limited to no governmental oversight to stop them from continuing. Even if some safeguards are in place that attempt to regulate the CIA and other agencies like it, they are unable to do so as thoroughly as necessary due to much of its operations remaining hidden even from Congress. In almost every incident that changed our country or the world as a whole, behind it is a shadowy group of individuals associated with this agency. It isn't only average citizens and conspiracy theorists that recognize this fact, though. This quote by JFK is considered to be of dubious origin if referring to recent mainstream media articles on it. However, it was originally published in the April 25, 1966 edition of the New York Times, which is ironically a news source that is well regarded by the critics that have a tendency to lash out towards people like you and I. There is also this quote by President Harry Truman, the president whose administration established the CIA to begin with in 1947. It's intriguing to hear two former U.S. presidents, the one who played a role in creating the CIA and another who was famously resistant to the agency, speak this way about an intelligence agency that's supposed to have the country's national security and best interests at heart. Perhaps it's a coincidence, then, that Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president who was elected after 33rd President Harry Truman, made this statement.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Keeping in mind this statement by Eisenhower about the existence of a so-called military-industrial complex, as well as the danger it poses, and this speech by JFK before his assassination in 1963, one may begin to wonder what type of shadowy group these men were aware of.
Ladies and gentlemen,
the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
From Dallas, Texas, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Even if we'll never know for sure exactly who these men were referencing in these speeches and why they felt it necessary to warn the public about them to begin with, the information that is publicly available to us makes it clear that there is indeed some type of shadowy undercurrent beneath the political machine. Dark channels that were created long ago for the purpose of obscuring this group's existence from the eye of the public, with the means to acquire vast material resources and seize power in countries around the world, all while remaining undetected. Before the Second World War broke out, the U.S. government mostly left intelligence duties to those in charge of American foreign policy, entities like the Department of State and the Armed Services. Diplomats and attachés would collect the bulk of foreign intelligence, but it was mostly through the course of standard business, although occasionally intelligence was obtained through clandestine meetings with secret contacts. The state and military at this time had their own security and counterintelligence procedures, and the Navy and Army created separate offices to decipher foreign communications. Senior diplomat Robert Murphy later reflected, quote, "It must be confessed that our intelligence organization in 1940 was primitive and inadequate. It was timid, parochial, and operating strictly in the tradition of the Spanish-American War." Another European war loomed over the world in the late 1930s, and the fears of communism and fascism pushed President Franklin D. Roosevelt to request greater coordination by the different intelligence arms across different departments. At the time, his request was not taken enthusiastically, so it wasn't until he made another request once more a year later did the gears get turning. Because of this, a new civilian office attached to the White House would be created by FDR on July 11, 1941. And it was called the Coordinator of Information, or the COI. It wasn't long after its creation that the COI expanded its responsibilities and transformed into the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, the title of which reflected the importance of intelligence and clandestine operations in modern war. On June 13, 1942, the OSS was formally created and got to work. And they had a lot of it. For 5 years, the OSS worked fervently throughout the war, and did so right up until its conclusion. Following World War II, the Truman administration created the CIA out of its predecessor, the OSS. Like all of the mechanisms of societal control covered thus far in this series, the CIA, and the evil it would eventually come to spread across the globe, emerged from the bloodshed of a world war. Unfortunately, unlike the world control groups like the Council on Foreign Relations and the propaganda disseminated by compromised mainstream media outlets, the CIA has the ability to remain completely in the shadows. They report to no government branch, lack any congressional oversight, and obtain the necessary resources for their operations not through hearings and democratic votes, but through the type of crimes the average person would assume is reserved for cartels, human traffickers, and terrorists, all in the name of national security. With the passing of the National Security Act of 1947, a monster was born, one far different than our country had ever seen before. One can imagine the potential for an entity like the CIA to be useful to world control groups like the Trilateral Commission,
It's going to be a very different world from the world that we have been living in.
The Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations. After all, the CIA's predecessor, the OSS, was almost entirely composed of wealthy elites from its creation. But what would these uses entail exactly? Now, if you were to watch anything about the CIA on any mainstream platform, the details would be notably different than what the CIA actually does and is. Sort of like this.
It only takes one new piece of foreign intelligence, and everything can change in an instant. Most people will never see your work.
Only 3 people in the world have access to the information we need.
Notify the field.
Your greatest strength will be the people around you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CIA.
You can play a role protecting our nation. Start a career at the CIA and do more for your country than you ever dreamed possible.
I wanted to be a librarian the first time I set foot in a library. Growing up gay in a small southern town, I was lucky to have a wonderful and accepting family. I always struggled with the idea that I might not be able to discuss my personal life at work. Imagine my surprise when I was taking my oath at CIA and I noticed a rainbow on then-Director Brennan's lanyard. Inclusion is a core value here. Officers from the top down work hard to ensure that every single person, whatever their gender, gender identity, race, disability, or sexual orientation, can bring their entire self to work every day.
In a way, I suppose this commercial is accurate. After all, the CIA is completely inclusive in that they're open to assassinate, overthrow, or manipulate any country of the world, no matter where it is. With that said, let's examine a chronological list of CIA atrocities and see for ourselves why it is that they are blamed for so many of the world's terrible events. Bearing in mind the current political climate and the tendency of many people to accuse others like you and I of being Nazis, let's flash back to the Nuremberg trials held after World War II in 1945. The Nuremberg trials were a series of military tribunals held by Allied forces under international law, and were most notable for the prosecution of prominent and high-ranking members of Nazi Germany who planned and carried out the Holocaust. In order to have this trial to begin with, of course, one must locate and capture the Nazis, many of whom were undoubtedly attempting to flee at the time, who committed these horrific crimes to begin with. However, while multiple American agencies were busy hunting down Nazi war criminals for arrest, the U.S. intelligence community was actively cooperating with these same men. And if that isn't bad enough already, they were smuggling them into America to go completely unpunished. The smuggling of Nazis out of Germany and into the United States was done in part by people like Alan Dulles on behalf of the OSS in what we now know is called Operation Paperclip, in which 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from Nazi Germany and smuggled into the United States for government employment after World War II. Many of these Nazis were former leaders of the Nazi Party, and went on to hold influential positions in different facets of American industry as well. Take Werner von Braun, for instance. The group of Nazis he was with were assimilated by U.S. intelligence agencies into NASA, where von Braun would end up serving as director of the Marshall Space Flight Center and chief architect of the launch vehicle that allowed the Apollo spacecraft to get to the moon. When we think about the CIA, most of us think about covert action, secret spy missions that include sneaking around and committing acts of espionage or sabotage against enemy combatants. Those activities stem from the covert action wing of the CIA, which was created in 1948 by Wall Street lawyer Frank Wisner, and was officially called the Office of Policy Coordination, which is an entirely mundane title for a branch of the CIA that in their own words would be responsible for, quote, propaganda, economic warfare, preventive direct action, sabotage, anti-sabotage, demolition, evacuation procedures, subversion against hostile states, the assistance of underground resistance groups, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries of the free world. In the same year, 1945, the agency would go on to corrupt the democratic elections in Italy. Because communists winning the elections were not in the best interests of the United States and its allies, the CIA swung the elections by buying votes, broadcasting propaganda, infiltrating and disrupting political organizations, and even threatening to beat up opposition leaders. Because of the CIA's influence, the communists were defeated. In 1949, the CIA created its first major propaganda outlet called Radio Free Europe, and the outlet would continue to receive covert CIA funding until the early 1970s. In some cases, its broadcasts were blatantly false, and for a time it was considered illegal to publish the transcripts of the broadcasts here in the United States. In episode 2 of this series, we spoke heavily about the effects propaganda has over the minds of the masses, and how huge the implications would be if propaganda would be purposefully weaponized by groups like the CIA and turned against us. While Radio Free Europe was targeting the citizens of countries in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East, it appears that a later CIA endeavor initiated in the early years of the Cold War, called Operation Mockingbird, would end up targeting citizens here at home. Headed by Frank Wisner, the same man responsible for the creation of the CIA's Covert Action Wing, the CIA began recruiting American news organizations and journalists to become spies and disseminators of propaganda. Others that were involved included Alan Dulles, Richard Helms, and Philip Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post. As time moved on, the media assets under the control of the CIA would come to include ABC, CBS, NBC, Newsweek, Time, Associated Press, Reuters, and many others. By the CIA's own admission, there was at least 25 organizations and 400 journalists that eventually became CIA assets.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here. This would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, the ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report.
If someone was under the impression that CIA-sponsored overthrows of democratically elected leaders around the world was a rare occurrence, they'd be wrong. In 1953, another CIA-backed overthrow was underway, this time in Iran. According to declassified CIA documents, the most feared mobsters in Tehran were hired by the CIA in order to stage pro-Shah riots across the city. Other men were also paid by the CIA and bussed into Tehran to help take over the streets of the city. Because of these actions, between 200 to 300 people, possibly even more, were killed in the conflict. These events would eventually culminate into Prime Minister Mossadegh's removal as leader of Iran, and he would eventually be tried and convicted of treason. Others that supported him were imprisoned, and some even received the death penalty. In 2013, the U.S. government formally acknowledged the role the U.S. played in the coup, and admitted to being in charge of both the planning and the execution of the coup. This included the bribing of Iranian politicians and dissemination of pro-coup propaganda.
It's actually been an open secret for decades, but for the first time now, the CIA has released documents that show its role in the 1953 coup. That is the coup that toppled Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister. Mohammad Mossadegh had moved to nationalize oil production in Iran. Well, the U.S. was concerned at the time that that would mean a victory for the Soviets in the Cold War. So shortly after his election, the CIA began to plan his overthrow, teaming up with Britain's MI6.
Now, the CIA, we've seen it spelling out its involvement in a series of newly declassified documents. These are the actual documents marked confidential, top secret, eyes only. It's the stuff of crime and mystery and spy novels. This one talks about the security implications of CIA letters of commendation for those who served in that operation codenamed TP Ajax. And this one, dated July 22nd, 1953, almost a month before the coup, it talks about preparing an official American statement to follow a successful coup. This is an event that the Iranians still talk about 60 years later with surprising frequency. What have you learned from these documents that you got to get a look at?
Talks about how this was approved at the highest levels of government. It details the amount of money that went into currying favor among the various sectors of Iranian society. And it points out how important this really was. Little did the CIA understand that this would have extraordinary repercussions 25 years later.
The CIA has also stated that the coup was undertaken, quote, under CIA direction, end quote. The agency had a busy year in 1953. Not only were they spending their time overthrowing democratically elected leaders in the Middle East, but back home they were also fervently working on perfecting the newly discovered craft of brainwashing and mind control. The infamous MKUltra project was initiated in 1953 and is known for the heinous and illegal activities undertaken by scientists, doctors, and other so-called professionals in the name of achieving complete and total control over an individual's mind. To achieve this objective, the CIA used unwitting test subjects, citizens of the US, Canada, and possibly other countries, for their experiments. They used numerous methods to manipulate the mental states of thousands. Techniques included the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs like LSD, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, in addition to other forms of torture, if those weren't bad enough already. Some victims of these experiments were apparently so badly damaged that they lost all faculties such as toilet training, while other victims of MKUltra's psychic driving experiments completely obliterated a lifetime full of memories in other subjects. There were others as well, like Frank Olson, that died because of these experiments. The research was carried out through multiple CIA front companies and included upward of 80 institutions, which included colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, as well as pharmaceutical companies. Fast forward 3 years, and the fruits of Radio Free Europe seem to have come to fruition in Hungary. In 1956, the Hungarian Revolution began, and the revolt appears to have been started in part by the broadcasting of Khrushchev's secret speech by Radio Free Europe. The broadcast allegedly hinted that the Americans would directly aid the Hungarians in their uprising, but unfortunately the aid failed to materialize, and tragically resulted in the vicious stomping out of the revolt. The numbers of casualties vary anywhere from 3,000 killed and 13,000 wounded to numbers far higher than that. Shifting our attention now briefly to Panama, another example of the CIA's handiwork would be the US-backed overthrow of Panama's dictator Manuel Noriega in the late 1980s. Noriega had long been a valuable asset to the US and the Central Intelligence Agency, and in fact had been on the CIA's payroll since at least 1966. According to this Reuters article, Noriega had formed the hemisphere's first narco-kleptocracy, while the United States had full knowledge of his drug trafficking operations. The footage you're seeing on your screen now is the U.S. invasion of Panama, a consequence of CIA activity related to Noriega in the years leading up to this. In order to achieve regime change or overthrow elected leaders in countries around the world, the United States can't just outright state that they're doing so, of course. They rely on training and funding rebel groups within that country to act as a proxy and do it for them. In most cases, though, the groups the CIA wants to recruit for an overthrow don't have the material resources on hand that's required to topple their government. Because of that, they need weapons, and in cases like Iran-Contra, the CIA is more than happy to assist them with that.
The Iran-Contra scandal transfixed Washington for most of 1987 and renewed a struggle as old as the Republic between the President and Congress.
I will tell you right now, Counsel, and all the members here gathered, that I misled the Congress.
How can our system of government work if the administration is not candid in its answers to the Congress?
Congressman Lee Hamilton of Indiana and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North of the President's National Security Council defined the two poles of the argument: a Reagan administration obsessed with preventing leaks and a Congress that could not get a straight answer to its questions. The Reagan administration's determination to sell arms secretly to Iran and to help guerrillas fighting the Marxist government of Nicaragua despite congressional objections was the engine that drove the Iran-Contra policy. Secretly, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North devised a scheme to finance the Contras by overcharging Iran for the weapons and to use the profits to help the rebels in Nicaragua.
I don't think it was wrong. I think it was a neat idea.
Nicaragua and the guerrilla battle to overthrow the regime of President Somoza.
see him? Yeah, where is
he? 9 months after losing a brief civil war that cost thousands of lives, the Sandinist guerrillas have launched what they call their final offensive. The Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, is named after the 1920s nationalist leader Augusto Sandino. At the beginning of June, they began their fight on 3 major fronts: along the Atlantic coast, in the north around Leon, and on the southern border with Costa Rica. The fighting then spread to the towns of Rivas, Masaya, and the Nicaraguan capital of Managua.
The Iran-Contra affair is extremely complex, and therefore most of its details are outside the scope of this video. However, a simple description of the events would be that it was a political scandal in the United States that occurred during Ronald Reagan's second term in the 1980s, and describes the trafficking and sales of weapons to Iran in order to fund and train the Contras in Nicaragua, which were a group of anti-Sandinista rebels bent on resisting the socialist government of Nicaragua. These actions had a major trickle-down effect, and it wouldn't take long before the consequences of conducting these types of covert operations in Nicaragua and elsewhere would be felt here in the United States, especially in the cities. The consequences came in the form of the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, which would eventually almost obliterate low-income black neighborhoods across the entire country. And on top of that, it would initiate the failed war on drugs that have destroyed countless lives, and still does.
Enterprising dealers went further, developing a form of cocaine that was even cheaper and packed a lot more punch.
This is it. The drug so powerful it will empty the money from your pockets. Make you sell the watch off your wrist, the clothes off your back.
Or kill your mother. Yep, that's what we're seeing.
On the streets of New York, it's called crack, and the deals go down quickly. You've just witnessed a buy. This form of cocaine comes concentrated. It is smoked rather than sniffed. It produces an intense high within 5 to 10 seconds that lasts only 5 to 10 minutes and leaves the user craving for more.
And this is the most addicting thing that probably ever existed in the world, you know? It will make you a slave.
If it wasn't for journalist Gary Webb in his Dark Alliance series, we may have never known about it. According to Webb, the operation went as follows, quote, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Bloods street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. This drug ring opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and as a result, the cocaine that flooded in helped spark a crack explosion in urban America." In order to support these claims, Webb primarily focused on 3 men: Ricky Ross, Oscar Danilo Blandón, and Norwin Menezes. According to Webb, Ricky Ross was a major dealer in LA, and Blandón and Menezes were Nicaraguans who smuggled the drugs into the country and supplied dealers like Ross. Webb claims that all three had relationships with the Contras as well as the CIA, and the only reason they were not successfully prosecuted in a timely manner is mostly due to their CIA and Contra connections. The crack cocaine epidemic is a perfect example of how the actions of the CIA either directly or indirectly affect U.S. citizens here at home. And unfortunately, this discovery by Gary Webb may have been the exact reason he ended up dying in what we're told is a suicide at a fairly young age. However, this isn't the only example of how operations undertaken by the CIA have ended up hurting the very citizens they're supposed to protect. We know that MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, included the illegal experimentation on unwitting American citizens. Although that's bad enough already, that wasn't the only domestic covert operation the CIA engaged in. Take Operation Chaos, for example. The CIA had been illegally spying on American citizens since at least 1959, perhaps earlier. But this operation significantly boosted the spying efforts. As the Vietnam War was raging, so too were the heated protests against it. The protests were primarily spearheaded by students on campuses across the country, and with President Johnson's approval, the CIA began infiltrating these campus organizations while posing as student radicals. The stated purpose of this operation was apparently to find Russian instigators that were sowing discord among the American populace, although none were ever found. Under Chaos, at least 7,000 people and 1,000 organizations were spied on by the CIA. One of the more important examples of domestic CIA operations is Operation Midnight Climax, a sub-project of MKUltra. This operation is extremely important not only because of the implications of targeting American citizens, but because this is the operation that initiated the practice of sexual blackmail as a form of control. In 1954, the CIA created a web of safe houses across the San Francisco area where prostitutes on CIA payroll would lure in unsuspecting Johns to have sex with, and would proceed to drug them with LSD while CIA agents monitored and recorded the acts from behind a one-way mirror. Because of this operation, several significant operational techniques were developed in this theater, one of the most important being the craft of sexual blackmail. As I mentioned a few moments ago, these covert operations undertaken by the CIA tend to have a trickle-down effect that ends up negatively impacting the average American citizen. Aside from the explosion of the crack cocaine epidemic that decimated inner-city black families in the 1980s, there are two other examples of this trickle-down effect that come to mind. The infamous Charles Manson and the also infamous Unabomber. At first, one may wonder how two serial killers could have anything to do with the CIA. However, if you take a moment to consider what it is Manson is known for, brainwashing people into committing murder for him, and the family's consistent use of psychedelic drugs like LSD, the pieces begin to come together. According to research done by Tom O'Neill and outlined in this article by The Guardian, Manson may have been used as a guinea pig by a CIA-connected doctor that was heavily involved in the CIA's mind control project MKUltra. Regarding Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, most of the public refers to him as yet another psychotic serial killer, a man bent on committing acts of pure evil and using bombs sent through the mail in order to achieve this evil. However, what many people fail to realize is the fact that Kaczynski was also swept up in a covert CIA operation, and like Manson, it just so happened to be the mind control program MKUltra. While Kaczynski attended Harvard University, he was one of the students that was experimented on and dosed with copious amounts of LSD. Through MKUltra and its sub-projects, the agency was attempting to find ways to bring people to their psychological breaking point. Taking even a cursory look at the actions of Manson, the family, and the Unabomber, it appears as if the CIA found exactly what they were looking for. In episode 1 of this series, I identified and examined some of the world control groups that are responsible for guiding the trajectory of society on this planet. We discussed the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderberg Group, and how these groups drive legislation and political change from above formal government parameters. Now that we understand a little more about the sordid history of the CIA and their involvement in weapons trafficking, government overthrows, and drug trafficking, it's time to take a look at what role the CIA plays in the New World Order Great Reset agenda. To do that, one doesn't have to look much further than the membership lists of each of these world control groups. As you can see, it appears as if there's quite a bit of overlap between these influential think tanks and the Central Intelligence Agency. This isn't the only overlap either. Many of those on the Council on Foreign Relations are also on the Trilateral Commission, which also hosts a fair amount of former CIA personnel and Epstein associates. While no one can say with complete confidence how exactly this system works in its entirety, it is safe to say that the world control groups here may serve as the brain of the Illuminati, for lack of a better term, while the CIA serves as the secretive frontline forces that fund and carry out the necessary actions required in order to make their visions a reality. It's the information in this video that really makes someone look at the Jeffrey Epstein situation through an entirely different lens than what he's primarily known for, which is child trafficking. But what was it that he was also known for?
In this country, one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers is providing chilling new insight into his alleged sex trafficking operation. Maria Farmer says Epstein sexually assaulted her more than 20 years ago. In her first TV interview, Farmer alleged that Epstein had extensive surveillance inside his home, including tiny pinhole cameras.
He showed me where the men monitoring everything were. I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. It was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments.
And aren't there rumors about Jeffrey Epstein having possibly been a weapons trafficker and a spy? And wasn't Jeffrey Epstein a member of both the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations? If you take the history of the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking, sexual blackmail, and weapons trafficking, you begin to see that Jeffrey Epstein may have fit in quite well in the shadowy circles of spycraft and espionage. But surely the CIA doesn't engage in child trafficking like Epstein did, though, right? A single glance at the police records on the Finders Cult, a group that came to the police and FBI's attention for their potential child trafficking activity, indicates otherwise.